Since the 2nd of February of 2024, DOT mains are living in a post-apocalyptic world, scavenging for scraps in the ruins of Honkai Star Rail, hoping for any amount of buffs, be it Bubbin, Jiaoqiu, Cypher, and even a tricycle team. At long last, the savior of DOT society is finally here. Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on this episode of Early Access Reviews, we are going to be taking a look at Hysilens, our brand new 5-star physical nihility DOT support plus DPS archetype that's finally going to bring a light into the long-forgotten DOT comp. We're going to be taking a look at her performance, team comps, lightcones, Eidolons, and everything, so without further ado, let's get into today's content. Hysilens is going to be a physical bleed support DOT that specializes in both increasing the damage you deal with DOT via her vulnerability as well as defense down, as well as an impressive DOT multiplier of her own through the bleed DOT. Her unique mechanic of utilizing every element of DOT with the help of her ally, namely Kafka as well as technically Black Swan, is gonna make her a cornerstone foundation for any DOT teams. With her ultimate having the same usage of having the additional damage based on the number of DOT, as well as triggering every DOT for 150% of their multiplier, you can in fact combine this with any sort of DOT teams for some of the most satisfying damage numbers ever since SU back in 2024. That being said, Hysilens is not meant to be played as the only DOT within a DOT team comp, just like Kafka as well as Black Swan. If defense down was represented as an archetype, then DOT would be it, having their final damage compounding higher each time a brand new DOT unit is added into the roster because their kit synergizes so well with one another. With the Kafka rework having almost doubled her speed of applying the DOT triggers, Hysilens is pretty much invaluable to any DOT mains looking for a DOT upgrade after 1.5 years. I do want to stress again that this guide is not really just for Hysilens, but basically DOT as a whole. Without Kafka, I would highly advise players against putting Hysilens and playing DOT, right? Get Kafka first, and then we'll talk later in the future. Jumping into the character kit, her basic attack actually allows her to be more or less skill point neutral because your ultimate is only going to be 110 cost, so it's very efficient to give skill points into either Kafka for the DOT triggers or the sustain for the comfort. For her skill, is gonna be a 3-turn debuff just like Black Swan. Rotation is gonna be roughly the same even if they are both on the same team to apply the debuffs and then allow Kafka to slowly ramp up from there. The multiplier here is only at 140%, which is not going to be our main focus, mainly there for the 20% vulnerability debuff, and it's very good as full-on AoE instead of a 3-target debuff like Black Swan. Speaking of which, when are we getting a buff? For our ultimate, this is going to be the main gimmick with the buff applied as a zone similar to Runmei as well as 3B skills that goes down at the start of her turn. This is also one of the lowest ultimate costs with 110 energy. With energy regeneration units like Huo, you can pretty much guarantee a 3-turn ultimate almost with no issue while still being skill point positive, running skill basic. The attack reduction slightly reduces the main sustained pressure, while the 25% defense can stack on extremely well with Black Swan's 20.8%, Prisoners 18%, as well as potential defense reduction lightcones such as Resolution or Cypher's Ninja lightcone for 16 or 24% respectively. Silver Wolf, Pella, E1 Runmei can also raise this even further for potentially 100% defense down. Taking a look into this additional damage portion, it looks like Robin and Triby's additional damage, except that this additional damage is going to be the exact same as a DOT, affected by your defense down for DOT, your DOT vulnerability, and it helps us to apply our Arcana stacks, especially if you are going to be using Black Swan. On top of that, this is a very impressive multiplier because it can trigger up to 8 times for each DOT, of which there are 4. In total, this will be a 2560% multiplier for a single use of the ultimate, assuming that all 4 DOTs are applied, which can be extremely easily done using her talent. For the 8 DOT procs, an example could be 4 Hysilens talent, 1 Kafka light cone, because Erode is not going to be the same from the shock, 1 Kafka ultimate, as well as 1 Black Swan talent, that's going to be the Arcana. Lastly, 1 singular break DOT applied as per your normal break conditions from wind, physical, lightning, or fire, but mainly just going to be the first 3 elements, right? If you're not able to consistently hit the 8 stacks for the full procs, the average range should be looking between somewhere of 480% to 640% from Kafka and Black Swan. This also helps Black Swan stack on Arcana at an incredibly fast pace, hitting 50 stacks easily even at E0 within 2 turns, because each hit from Hysilens zone can stack on Black Swan's Arcana, but keep in mind that the zone only deals damage after everything else, so after your Black Swan's Arcana, it will only count towards the next turn. And then jumping into a talent, using Hysilens alone, you can theoretically make any team apply the 4 DOTs as long as it is an attack. Since the priority is going to be given to a different damage over time, you would just need 4 hits from anyone to apply all 4 DOTs. While the bleed says a 20% max HP, which sounds absolutely busted, it is still limited by Hysilens' personal attack, so getting an attack a little bit higher could improve the damage, but in reality this doesn't really change too much because the bleed just functions like any other normal bleed multipliers. Keep in mind, this is a 100% base chance, which means a minimum of 67% EHR is going to be required to guarantee all of your DOTs for 100% accuracy against 40 effect res bosses, but after taking a look at the tracer later on, you would probably stack this onto 120% to unlock the full benefits. For the technique, this is a dimension similar to Himiko and Well, no issues of clashing with DOTs such as with Black Swan as well as Huo Huo. By using this technique, you can instantly gain 2 DOTs, meaning in battle you can immediately apply all 4 DOTs if you enter with Kafka's technique because she can inflict shock herself. And then jumping into the major tracers, it is very simplistic and synergizes quite well with a kit as well as DOT as a whole, so nothing too deep to understand. So for the very first one, the EHR conversion, you want to build 120% EHR to hit the 90% damage limit, so running out of EHR chest would be needed to build for speed and attack, and also considering Kafka's 100% attack trace, you are definitely going to be running her with 120% EHR. And then the second line for the Hysilens ultimate usage, it is pretty much another version of Kafka's DOT proc with an even higher DOT proc frequency for a DOT team, but you are definitely not going to be able to replace Kafka because Kafka just triggers things way too fast with a skill, follow-up attack, as well as an ultimate. And then lastly, you are pretty much just going to be starting off the zone similar to Ramei, Trippy, and Robin with their buffs out immediately to allow us to apply all of our DOT as well as debuffs. The skill point recovery allows us to be slightly more skill point positive for Kafka and Black Swan to stack skills, which means you really want to try to hit that 3-turn ultimate rotation. Jumping to the minor tracer is going to be 14 speed, 18% attack, and 10% EHR, which is very useful as a whole for the Hysilens entirety. And then going to the skill leveling priority, out over 10 over skill over basic. You can consider ignoring the basic if you are going to be tight on the resources, but since you're going to be using a basic quite frequently, you might as well just level it up eventually. Now jumping into Hysilens endgame performance, I can confidently say that DOT teams are definitely back to be competitive against the version 3 counterparts, with the performance competing extremely well, potentially even outperforming some of those version 3 DPSs that lack the vertical support investments. Across all 3 endgame content, their performance was very stable, with nothing that targets against DOT specifically. Now I tested out the following team on full E0S1 running a E0S0 Kafka on tutorial, which I personally feel is pretty much going to be better than Signature because of the insane energy regeneration, similar to how you will run Battery Saval or Battery Herda, just giving them as much energy as possible. You could also consider running Kafka with 4-piece Ego, but for consistency and I couldn't be bothered running for speed subs, I just went with the 4-piece DOT Prisoner. For the MOC and APOC, the next update is going to be featuring a brand new boss, so I'm not going to be talking about it in this part specifically. If you want to check it out, feel free to check out our future videos, right? Also note that for all these 3 endgame content, DOT was buffed with the environment, so do lower your expectations for future endgame results. For Memory of Chaos run with additional burn, Pure Vision with additional grid from DOT, as well as APOC Flame Weaver with the energy regeneration. So these are going to be the results that my editor is going to put up over here. For Memory of Chaos, generally the 2 main things to consider are skill point and ultimate priority. Your skill point priority should be given to Kafka over Black Swan over Huo Huo whenever necessary, since Hysilens does have a 3-turn vulnerability skill as well as a 3-turn ultimate for herself. If you find yourself running out of energy to maintain Hysilens ultimate, you can slot in a skill over Black Swan while still running an attack percentage rope and Huo Huo if you really want to try to min-max that damage a little bit more. For the ultimate priority, it is gonna be Huo Huo first, assuming your team is not at maximum energy, followed by Black Swan, followed by Hysilens, followed by Kafka, assuming that you have all of your debuffs at the same time. Trying to let Kafka take action after everything has been applied and the Arcana stack is at the absolute highest in order to trigger the highest possible damage. For Automatron, it is possible to break him manually before his 3 stacks using a Hysilens basic attack first instead of a skill, and then afterwards apply a vulnerability debuff with Hysilens after he summons the goldfish. For the fight itself against Savrok, it has been a DOT matchup ever since version 2, so it's not going to be too new, and Hysilens has made it even easier to do a full auto 1 cycle. Before Savrok's next action begins, it is also possible to stack on enough energy on Black Swan to cast the ultimate again, thereby maintaining a 50 Arcana stack without fail with Hysilens. Now this would require my Black Swan to be on energy regeneration rope, but 100% uptime on Arcana may be worth it, especially with phase change bosses where you need to reapply Arcana as soon as possible. Aventuring for the second half was a lot more manageable compared to last time, since Hysilens fills in the physical weak bleed on top of the DOT being more synergistic in general. AI had a little bit of a issue in prioritizing your skills during the dice phases, where you ideally want to use the skill for all 3 DOT units to guarantee your energy regeneration, so manual play for the dice would be recommended. Then jumping into Pure Fiction, there's not much to say. Both halves we've managed to finish 40k with full auto, 1 cycle remaining. Black Swan and Kafka or energy regeneration rope drastically help with the wave and mob changes to bring their damage up into the next phase, thereby letting Hysilens base kit deal the damage with either additional damage or the DOT application. The main target, once you hit 50 stacks with Arcana, it pretty much never dropped back down to 0 ever again, and this combined with Kafka and Hysilens triggering all of the DOTs is a great example in showing how quickly DOT's damage can ramp up once you have fully applied, assuming the boss does not have any phase change. Then for A-Box Shadows, this is an exceptional performance on Flame Weaver, because you have seen from the clip just now, Hysilens was almost able to spam her ultimate pretty much infinitely to his face because of the energy regeneration buff working perfectly once the rest of the team has maxed out energy, right? Do not expect this to be the norm once the energy buff goes away, but nonetheless, insane performance and was really satisfying. For the Doomsday B-side, it is not going to be as easy as Flame Weaver, but we still cleared in 1432 action value despite not having a DOT buff for the second half. All 3 targets will pop relatively quickly with Kafka's triggers, getting the first break at 1796 and the second break at 1526. More annoying thing was that once the middle target actually died, Kafka's skills cannot trigger the adjacent hand because it was all the way at the other side. So for players who are wondering the strengths as to whether DOT is going to be strong considering this entire thing was done with E0, rest assured this version 3 update with Hysilens is definitely going to make them feel a lot better compared to last time. And then jumping on into the Lightcone session, Hysilens does have a very strong signature Lightcone. So the Lightcone basically gives you a 30% DOT damage vulnerability buff as well as a 10% speed up for 3 turns, which is pretty much going to be up permanently, right? You also get a 40% EHR increase, and although the base chance is at 80%, you should have no issues since you should be building 120% EHR on Hysilens anyway. So you can take a look at the comparison over here between signature Lightcone as well as the 4-star Eyes of Prayer S5. For a Lightcone comparison, it would be dependent on your entire team and not just Hysilens. So I focus on a Kafka AoE ultimate as well as the individual physical damage for comparison. It was a roughly 15% damage drop off from the raw damage, but keep in mind this will add up the longer your fight goes on with all the various DOTs and debuffs. So your Arcana hitting your 50 stacks and the frequency of Kafka triggering, it will all make this Lightcone shine even brighter. Now I would imagine the gap to widen to around roughly 25% final damage at full efficiency, not including a team-wide 10% speed, which is also a very nice buff by itself. So generally speaking, this is a very strong S1, and if your Kafka and Black Swan has already gotten very strong investments, then this Lightcone can further amplify DOT sitting to the next level, especially with, for example, E1 Kafka and E1 Black Swan. So you're basically putting this Lightcone not really just for Hysilens, but for DOT as a whole, right? So for a relatively cheaper investment, the vertical returns on the S1 in my opinion is going to be very worth it. Know that this debuff from the S1 is going to be applied automatically, so if you have 6 debuffs, not just DOT, it will allow for the instant 30% DOT vulnerability. So for players owning an E1 Black Swan and only E1 not E0, you could consider getting this to Black Swan for the 6 debuffs while letting Hysilens get Black Swan or Jiao Qiu's S1. Now without the E1, Black Swan can only go up to 4, so it's not going to be that viable, right? Then for the other alternatives, Jiao Qiu and Black Swan S1 are very good replacements, while Eyes of Prey and Good Night Sleep Well are going to be the 4-star replacements. Then moving on to the Relic sets, it's super straightforward. Slamming your 4-piece Prisoner, slamming your 2-piece Rivalry, that's pretty much going to be it, right? For your main stats, EHR over attack percentage almost every single time, speed boots, physical damage, attack or energy regeneration rope, as well as for a subset, speed and attack percentage as well as EHR, but you should be hitting at least 120% EHR, so don't really worry about it too much. You could consider running an attack percentage rope for Hysilens since the physical damage only affects physical damage and not the other DOTs applied by Hysilens herself, but for majority of her damage output, it is actually going to be coming from the ultimate zone's triggers. So because of that, since most of it is still going to be stuck to physical damage DOT, and we're getting a shit ton of attack from Kafka and Huo, running physical damage is going to be the best slot over here, right? Rest assured, even if you run physical damage boost, you're still able to hit a 3600 attack requirement very comfortably with Kafka as well as Huo's attack buff. Then moving on to the energy regeneration segment, you can see this tiny little table over here. With regards to energy, assuming a skill basic rotation, her ultimate uptime was a relatively stable 3-turn ultimate with Huo's energy regeneration. Without an energy regeneration rope, you might have a 1-turn ultimate downtime if she did not get hit or kill enough mobs, so using the skill one more time might be needed for an attack percentage rope. Players without a 3-turn consistent ultimate should definitely use an energy regeneration rope because 100% ultimate uptime is extremely important, especially if you have a big window of DOT coming right after Hysilens turns ends, as well as the 1 skill point refund. So for example, if you do not have Huo, then I believe that energy regeneration is going to be the best answer. And then for the set bonus, honestly, there really isn't too much to say. They have been a DOT stable ever since they have released, with pretty much no other close substitutes as of now. Rivalry is going to be easier to proc, but Glamorph can also work, especially with the S1 10% speed buff to replace Rame's speed while still using Black Swan. IBC can also be considered if you have a spare set lying around, but overall damage is going to be more important than attack. Then jumping on into Eidolons, I will say that Hysilens has some extremely strong Eidolons, especially for the E1. So I can sort of see this as an example where Honkai Star Rail, they really want DOT bros to eat a good meal with vertical Hysilens investments, assuming that you're not going to be getting another DOT update anytime soon, which is a little bit unfortunate, like Black Swan, right? Yeah, jumping on into the Eidolon 1, this is, in my opinion, a game-changing Eidolon 1. Yep, and that's gonna be an Eidolon 1 instead of an Eidolon 2, unlike your other DPSs, right? This is pretty much gonna be, first of all, a 16% final damage multiplier for all DOT in an E1. Absolutely insane. And as usual, for my personal Eidolon values, it is mostly going to lie into energy regeneration, action value, final multiplier, or skill point generation. So this definitely take one of the boxes. And on top of the 16% final damage for all DOTs, you essentially duplicate an additional DOT that coexists with the other DOTs, guaranteeing your 8 procs or 640% multiplier instead of the random fluctuations between 480 to a 640% depending on your DOT. So for example, if you are going to be using Hysilens at E0, you can get 4 DOT from Hysilens, maybe 2 to 3 with Kafka and Black Swan, and 0 to 1 with the Break DOT for a combined total of 480 to 640% DOT multiplier for Hysilens speed. But now that you have the E1, you are guaranteed to trigger 8 DOTs from Hysilens herself. So you're pretty much guaranteed 640% multiplier every single time without fail. So E1 extremely powerful for a vertical investment. And for the Eidolon 2 is essentially a 90% damage buff for all of your DOT allies as long as you hit 120% EHR, which should be no issues whatsoever for Black Swan Kafka, because we do have the Kafka update. It's the last patch. You pretty much want an EHR body for every single one of DOT nowadays. And then for your Eidolon 4 is pretty much more res down, because why not, even more value, because all of our E4s nowadays are getting a lot better. And then lastly for the Eidolon 6, this is gonna be a standard E6 final multiplier damage increase, except it is a absolutely insane multiplier damage increase. So your total stacks goes from 8 to 12, so that's gonna be the brand new cap, and with every single one of your proc going from 80% to 100%. So previously your total theoretical highest ceiling with an ultimate is 2560%. Now with the E6 is gonna be 4800%, effectively almost doubling your damage from this ultimate multiplier, which is absolutely insane. And this maximum trigger is definitely not going to be a concern. Can you even hit 12 sets of DOT? Yes, because we did unlock the E1 Hysilens. So at the end of the day, E1 or S1 for vertical investments, I would actually say they are both extremely strong vertical investment upgrades. And E1 S1 is a pretty nice stopping point if you really want to go all in for DOT teams, right? Just like your E1 Kafka as well as E1 Black Swan. From a cost perspective, the S1 is technically cheaper, and you could give this signature lightcone to Black Swan instead, while using Black Swan's lightcone for Hysilens herself. The E1 is also extremely powerful, basically a stronger version of Black Swan's E1, except it's the final damage DOT multiplier as well as the DOT duplicate effect. So in terms of strictly a final damage check, E1 is going to have more value than S1, especially if you have lightcone replacements. Now finally moving on to Hysilens team comp option. First of all, for any DOT players, Kafka is unfortunately irreplaceable, even more so than any V2 or V3 units. Her frequency of attacks as well as DOT proc is going to be the fastest in the entire entire game. So without Kafka, everything for DOT just comes to slow, really putting the overtime in real overtime for your DOT units. Now, I don't think this would be an issue for any DOT players, since almost every single DOT main would definitely have Kafka ever since she has launched, and if you truly want to play DOT, then Kafka is basically the tribute of DOTs, right? So with that being established, your sustain slots can vary between Huohuo and Hysilens, or even consider Gallagher, while slot 3 can be with another DOT or another support. Now, I'll discuss the other comps I'm not mentioning here in the live server, so I will focus strictly on DOT compositions in this segment. All testings are going to be an E0S1 baseline, except with E0S0 Kafka as well as an E0S0 Tribi. Between the 3 normal comps, Black Swan was definitely the highest damage amplification out of everyone. At 50 Arcana stacks with defense down as well as vulnerability stacks, synergizes way too nicely with Hysilens as well as Kafka, cementing the triple DOT placement. Jiao Qiu or even 4-stars like Sampo and Gui Naifeng or Luca could potentially see play over here, and we will be finding out in the future videos. For Run Mei, her res pen, break efficiency, and damage buff that are slightly weaker than Black Swan's kit, it is still going to be very strong, especially at full E0 and full auto. The biggest issue with Run Mei is that she's simply not as synergistic compared to Black Swan, especially because now DOT really wants the entire team to be focused on DOT. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future maybe a sustain can also do DOT, so that's going to be that next time, right? So on top of that, Black Swan also helps us trigger the 8 stacks of additional bleed more frequently. If you're going to be using Run Mei, you're probably not going to be getting a consistent 8 stacks, so probably at 6, 5, or even 4 stacks, right? This team was also particularly skill point positive with a Run Mei S1, meaning the sustained pressure should be lower with your Huohuo skill spam, Hysilens attack debuff, as well as Run Mei just generally breaking the enemies a lot faster. I also want to kind of point over here, during my run on Aventurine, Kafka somehow managed to roll only 1s and 2s on the dice, despite her having so many AoEs. So, you know, it is what it is, right? Players who want to try their hands on DOT can definitely consider this comp and possible vertical investments on Hysilens or Kafka if they're interested in DOT playstyle. So in the future, maybe when even a version 4 DOT replacement comes out, you can then slowly replace the Run Mei for now. And then moving on to the next team for the version 3 wheelchair duo Tribi as well as Hysilens. They are still exceptionally strong, but sometimes things just never change. Hysilens and Tribi synergy is honestly still the same, didn't change anything at all, but Kafka and Hysilens has their own AoE ultimate to boost up your Tribi's energy uptime, with both their ultimates having an extremely high frequency to proc your Tribi ultimate as well as Dance. Now the damage is going to split a lot more away from solely focused on DOT into DOT plus Tribi plus Hysilens as well, so it feels more well-rounded instead of relying solely on DOT. You can expect them to perform very well in condense, especially in pure friction. And also, saying the name Hysilens and Hysilens, holy shit, I never want to do this again, so yep, just know this, right? Do know that even though this team was a little bit rough on Aventurine, first of all, there's no wind and quantum weakness for Tribi as well as Hysilens. The Aventurine phase 1 energy drain heavily embedded the entire team's ultimate uptime, while the dice in the phase 2 is basically free ultimates for everyone. But unfortunately, Kafka would waste all of her DOT proc follow-up attacks, which is gonna be a DPS loss. Lastly, the final team, which is going to be our brand new Dog Clone, right, with Hysilens replacing Black Swan back in version 2. Last time this was implemented, it actually worked out pretty well at the start, where we can deal with the mobs using Acheron's ultimate, and the DOT can ramp up over time against the main target. The issue with that team is eventually when Acheron cannot deal with the mobs frequently enough and the DOT just doesn't give you enough damage amplification, then it starts to fall apart, right? For this specific team, it aims to do a very similar thing, except Hysilens can help trigger ultimates at a slightly faster pace while synergizing with Kafka herself. Hysilens and S1 was also very important to help us generate enough slash dream stacks to power through and getting us the Acheron ultimates, almost getting a 1 cycle for Acheron at 4% HP off. Now the AI was also a little bit scuffed at skill point allocation, sometimes using basic for Kafka and Hysilens while prioritizing a Hysilens heal. Now, that being said, you could make an even stronger version of this team by replacing Kafka with Tribi if you have an E2 Acheron to fill in the damage multiplier gap for only using one Hility teammate. Tribi plus Hysilens attacks applying the debuffs using Hysilens keep is going to be very synergistic, and keep in mind, and vertical investment E1 Tribi also scales very well in the entire game of HSR itself. Overall, this damage is not going to be as strong for Acheron compared to a dedicated debuffer like Cypher or Silverwolf, but this team also allows for flexibility if players just want to try a fun little DOT cron team comp, especially in SU. With that, we have come to the end of Hysilens Early Access review. Let me know what you guys think of her. I think generally speaking, DOT as a whole with her update has become a lot stronger for this patch update. Looking forward to see how this entire DOT archetype is going to be shaping up towards the next couple of patches, or is it just going to be a single environment? So we'll leave it up to that to see, right? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Word of the day is going to be saved. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join our Patreon for our anime. We have 10% off gamers up using code POKE. All the best of our gacha pools. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.